morning, good afternoon, good evening from beautiful Paris. I'm really delighted to welcome you all for the first Women's Forum Daring Circle virtual session. As you know, our Daring Circle are innovative cross-industry working groups guiding Women's Forum partners both in the public and in the private sectors, academics, experts, NGOs, scientists. We work not only on gender issues, but on critical, crucial issues that concerns the entire humanity. Therefore, we work on women for AI, women for business, women for climate actions, women for health, women for STEM. Key issues where women are disproportionately impacted and where the leadership is paramount. I'm very proud for what we have been achieving in the Daring Circle since 3 years. Thank you all for your commitment, your insights, your action, your initiatives. Now it is a time to act and concretize this work. The pandemic has made some of the obstacles to women more visible, but the pandemic demonstrates the essential role women are playing in economies and society. Women are on the front line to take care of the most vulnerable population, but women are also the driving force behind progress in innovation, science, research, policies to fight the pandemics. You know, 91% of the G7 population considers gender equality a priority, according to our Women's Forum Barometer. A priority. What are we waiting for? There is a momentum. There is a momentum for she-covery, where women are fully involved with men in shaping a better future for all. Now more than ever, we need women's voices, ambition and action to co-create a more sustainable future. Now more than ever, we need women in the workforce, in the labs, in the boardrooms, at the decision-making tables to lead climate action, to design the future of work, to drive ethical and responsible finance. Now, more than ever, we need a change of paradigm, with women at the heart of the economy, science, and society. This year, we stand ready to lead with power and purpose. Women bringing their added value and their strong contribution across generations, cultures, regions, private and public sectors. We will launch our call to action to G7 and G20 leaders. We will take our flagship meetings and bring the Daring Circle works all around the world. We will spark collective action for inclusive progress. Let's engage for impact, for a she-covery for all.
One.
A warm welcome to everyone. And thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Sophie Lambin, and I'm the editor partner of the Women's Forum. As Chiara Corazza has just said, these daring circles are really the engine of our collaborative work with our partners throughout the year, bringing together leaders to address complex issues such as climate, health, tech, and inequality in business, issues that take more than a single entity to solve. Today's session is dedicated to women and STEM. The past year has confirmed how STEM, or science, technology, engineering, and mathematics skills are like a new superpower. STEM skills are not only being deployed to serve patients and develop vaccines, but also to predict and track the spread of diseases such as COVID-19. And many of our economies and societies have leaned on STEM to go virtual and contribute to protect what livelihoods we could during lockdown. All of this highlights how critical it is to address the gender gap and skill shortage in STEM. And for the Women's Forum, this is really a critical part of an inclusive recovery and future. So to set the tone today, I'd like to introduce a young leader who is already shaping the future through STEM. Gitanjali Rao, our keynote speaker, was Time's first ever Kid of the Year in 2020, in recognition of her remarkable commitment to inspiring other young innovators. She's also the author of the book, A Young Innovator's Guide to STEM, which just came out yesterday. Gitanjali, we are so delighted to have you with us today, and would like to offer you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. I appreciate it. So I'm going to kick this off by saying a huge hello, everyone. And it is fantastic to be with you here today. And thank you for having me. And I hope all of you are doing well. So here, I want to start with a quick story. Let me get my screen going. So in 2001, after a devastating earthquake actually hit in Western India, there was this guy who really changed my view on the world forever. So Mansukh Prajapati, he was essentially this, he was just this one guy who was sitting in his room one day thinking that he wanted to change the world for the better. And that's exactly who I look for. I look for people who want to make change in the world, but beyond that, look for, their passion of helping other people. So Mansukh, he essentially was this potter with high school education, and he saw this huge shortage of food for the residents of the towns and villages. And due to this lack of electricity infrastructure, there was absolutely no way to store and preserve the food through a refrigerator. But his empathy for the people around him really drove him to look for a solution to this issue of refrigeration and food preservation without electrical refrigeration involved. And he tried many ideas for several years and finally developed Mitti-Cool, which is this clay refrigerator that works on the principles of evaporation, requires absolutely no electricity, and stores food, vegetables, and even milk fresh for days. It costs around $35 and is used in rural areas in several countries across the world. But this is the essence of innovation, right? Mansukh is a change maker, particularly in the sense that his motivation to innovate was driven by an immense urge to help his fellow humans. But we need to recognize that this is one example, and certainly by all means not unique. Ali Shahbaz created the iodine-coated life-saving dot for women with iodine deficiency. Jane Chen and her team created a $25 baby incubator, and so on. All of us can and do solve problems around us once we are motivated. My name is Gitanjali Rao. I'm 15 years old, and I'm an innovator, author, and promoter of science, technology, engineering, and math, especially for students and youth. I write and speak at multiple schools and forums like these to socialize the importance of essentially using science and technology as a catalyst for social change in our community. So my request to all of you is to support folks like me through sponsorships, internships, mentorships, and even friendships. Youth do have the power to change the future, to create a sustainable world and environment. And my challenge to you is to say yes. If a student asks to work with you for a particular product idea, say yes. If a student has a question for you, say yes. Your support makes a difference, and I can say that from personal experience. So I want to wrap up this speech in a high note before I hand it back over. Looking back on my journey, it's been a fun ride, and it's opened my eyes to many new truths. And I always felt that the recognitions came with responsibility. Our society is quick to create stereotypes and decide which jobs are based for whom based on who the individual is. It's the 21st century, and we're still talking about girls and women struggling to get education, being part of the engineering and technical job force, and fighting for equality. My generation is inheriting problems that will need all of us to solve. And I hope that by being here, I'm representing all the girls here so that we can do it too. We tend to shift blame or find excuses, and a large part of the problem is our own doing. Middle schools see the largest drops in girls in STEM fields. We see people around us and decide that this job isn't for us or we can't do it. And it's important to state that you make that choice for yourself and be what you want to succeed and help others. Yeah, there will be obstacles and failures, but I'm proud to say that I've failed more times than I've succeeded. While the world sees the recognitions, every student, every change maker, and every individual has their own ups and downs. We cannot just limit ourselves to the solutions of today. We're offered this unique opportunity to think bigger and solve bigger problems. I hope that with the right support and encouragement, I'm sure that many of us would be inspired to take up the challenge and help alleviate the problems in our society and protect the environment that we live in. Thank you so much for having me, and I'll hand it back over.
Wow. Thank you, Gitanjali. That was amazing. I think the question you pose it is, how do you do it, is indeed the question. And so many powerful messages for us all, allowing experimentation, learning from failure, ideate. I think it's a resounding yes from this network of women here. We would like to see how we can support you. And I hope this is the beginning of a conversation. I certainly would like to know more about the Children Kindness Network and how this network of women leaders can help you. So thank you again. I would love to continue this conversation, but we have a very full program. But as I say, this is the beginning of a conversation, and thank you again for your amazing source of inspiration. And I hope that everyone will go and check out your book because there seems to be a richness of insights that we can all benefit from. Thank you, Gitanjali. So now moving to the next part of this session, which is going to be led by Hind Uzani, Head of Strategy and Operation at Google Southern Europe, and Nadia Youssef, Managing Director and Partner at BCG. Nadia and Hind will together present some of the highlights from our most recent work and report from the Women for STEM Daring Circle, which we are launching today. So Hind, maybe I'll start with you first to set the scene. If you could maybe kick off the conversation with Nadia by telling us, based on your experience at Google, what opportunities do you see to close the STEM skill gap as we work towards an inclusive recovery?
I think if I look back over the past few months and what the pandemic allowed us to realize is the role that digital and the role that access to digital tools, to internet has played, being for the economy, for education, to stay connected for everyone, and somehow for equity. I strongly believe that innovation and digital tools will be game-changing, especially for an inclusive economic recovery. And having access to digital tools requires two things. One is investing in skills, and particularly investing in tech skills. And second is investing in tools, which require a scientific approach, a mapped way of thinking, and engineering. At Google, we made a pledge, which is to help 10 million people and businesses in Europe, Middle East, and Africa to digitize over the next 18 months. When you have such an ambition, you need to build tools that are intuitive and relevant for everyone. And that means being inclusive in the way you think them. And if I relate to our topic today, tools that work both for men and women is only like one aspect of what relevant tools for everyone would mean. And if you want to be inclusive, you need somehow representation in the team that conceive a product, in the team that design the product, in the team that build the product, the team that produce it. And if you want to have that representation, you need to identify which part of your pipeline potentially is leaky and how to address it. And when it comes to women in STEM, what the Women's Forum and its partners have done as part of the Daring Circle work is identify which part of the pipeline was leaky when it comes to STEM and how to fill the gap. When it comes to women in STEM, the unfortunate news is that the pipeline is leaky in many different parts, like being interested in STEM at early age, choosing STEM, for instance, at uni, choosing to start a career in STEM or evolving into a STEM field within your career. And over the last year, we had a chance with the Daring Circle to conduct a research through which Nadia will walk you through in a minute, that focuses on how upskilling or reskilling women that are part of your company into STEM field could be actually a great way to fill the pipeline gap.
Thank you so much, Hind. I'm now going to present to you some of the highlights from the report, which we are so excited was published today. It's entitled Unlocking Women's Leadership Through STEM Skills Programs, and it's based on research, as Hind described, that we've been doing over the past few months. We surveyed 10,000 men and women across 12 countries and came to some pretty interesting conclusions around both the importance of having skilling programs in your organizations to help address the leaky pipeline that Hind described, but also how to make those programs really effective. So let's jump into it, and I'll give you a quick preview. If we go to the next page, firstly, just to set the scene, our world is going through rapid disruption, and every organization needs the STEM skills that we know are important to succeed, as Hind was just describing. But our research shows that 40% of employers have difficulty finding the right talent, and 60% report that the skills gap in particular is holding those organizations back from innovating. Our argument from doing this research is that companies are sitting on a potential talent goldmine, and actually their existing women employees who work in STEM jobs could be those leaders if given more of the chance and those upskilling opportunities. And the current situation is not great. Women remain underrepresented in STEM, only 25% of the STEM workforce overall. And as we've already discussed, the pipeline to leadership is leaky, where women only represent 14% of STEM managers and only 9% of executives and CEOs in those type of organizations. And if we just go to the next page, the reason, one of the reasons for the leaky pipeline is that there are a lot of perceived obstacles amongst women in terms of overall gender diversity in their organizations. And in STEM, it is actually almost double the number of people who raise those obstacles versus their non-STEM peers. What's moreover, men in STEM underestimate those challenges around gender diversity even more than men who are outside of STEM. So if we take this as our starting point, we, I think, can conclude that by offering women in STEM more opportunities to gain new skills, companies can create the workforce that they need for the future, can close the gender gap in STEM, and also increase the number of women in STEM who advance into those roles. Now, when we talk about skills, a lot of people will often think about the technology skills, the technical skills that you need, but actually we found that soft or human-focused skills like communications, creativity, leadership, as Hind was describing as well, are really important. And what we found is that actually the ambition is there. Most STEM women are keen to learn new skills, and in fact, in some countries, even more than their male counterparts. And you can look in the report as to how that breaks down. But if we go to the next page, while the will is there to learn, 70 or more percent of women in STEM wanting to learn new skills, the way is not yet there. And that's what we're hoping now to share with you some insights that can help your organizations or yourselves to lobby in your organizations. Women in STEM face multiple barriers to taking advantage of the opportunities to learn new skills. That's our key finding here. Lack of time and inflexible schedules are top reasons, which is of course closely associated with the disproportionate amount of time that women devote to caregiving responsibilities and household responsibilities. But also when programs are offered, women's perceptions of their own abilities can impede them from even taking advantage of those opportunities. So there's also something to be done around the positioning of who is eligible for those skilling sessions. And one of the ways to do that positioning, if we go to the next page, is to really focus your skilling programs on things that actually motivate women. And we found that women prefer programs that are tied to day-to-day work and have real life application and can make a meaningful difference in the real world. We also, as you can see on the right side, looked at the format and setting that women prefer. They tend to prefer attending fewer, more concentrated courses rather than shorter spread out classes. They prefer on-demand skills training over needing to set to a set schedule, and they'd rather attend sessions in person than online. Of course, regulations permitting on that. So we've got some real richness in our research around both how to position skilling and also how to set them up. If we had to summarize the recommendations for organizations, it would really be 5 things. So firstly, understand what's needed. Determine what your current skill base is and where you've got gaps, but also do a survey to understand what your employees think about the existing offerings. Secondly, build a STEM curriculum that is tailored to the specific needs and preferences of women employees that we just showed you. So make it flexible, connected to the real work that happens on the job, and connected to making a big difference in the real world. Thirdly, promote opportunities through relevant channels such as women's networks or employee support groups or resource groups. This makes it seem more accessible. Fourthly, make it clear that actually gaining these skills in STEM topics are a path to leadership, and hold yourself to it. And finally, make it clear in your organization that this is a priority and that there is time set aside for skills training. Now, alongside all of this, we have to point out that it has to be complemented by a strong commitment to overall diversity and inclusion efforts. Skills programs can help fixing the leaky female talent pipeline, but it's just one of many activities that an organization should embrace to make their workforce more diverse. So in closing, and fitting with our theme today, women's STEM skills and leadership play a really urgent role in shaping a more inclusive and resilient, sustainable future in so many different applications. We must harness that potential for STEM skills if we want to close overall workforce gender gaps and create the conditions for women in STEM to really thrive and stick in those roles that we know that they have the right to be in. So the time for inclusive action is now. So I'm very delighted to have this launch, and the link is going to be provided for all of you who are viewing today. And with that, I will leave you with Sophie and to move on to the panel.
Great. Thank you very much, Hind and Nadia. Such a set of great and practical insights. I'm particularly glad to hear that making a meaningful difference in the real world is a motivator for women to adopt STEM skills. This is good for the world and good for women. So in the coming year, we hope to use this finding in our Daring Circle work and highlight, amongst other things, role models who are using STEM for good. Now to the main panel. I am delighted to introduce Trisha de Borgrave, our moderator. Trisha is a writer and a senior associate at the Global Women Leaders Strategic Philanthropy. And Trisha is also a very regular moderator to the Women's Forum. So thank you again for joining us, Trisha, and over to you.
Thanks very much, Sophie, and welcome to this particular segment of our conversation. I hope that we have enough time and to pause a little bit in terms of it's just been this incredible richness of information shooting at us from the moment this started, which is incredible. I wanted to just, if I could, preface just very quickly 3 points I think that is feeding into what we've just heard, which is we keep talking about this post-COVID recovery in terms of rebuilding. But as we've heard from Gitanjali, how we've heard all the things that are potentially possible and happening right now, this is really about not just women's societal status and their right to economic opportunity and fulfillment. This is about reinventing ourselves. This is reinventing the wheel of human activity. And we have never done this in the history of humankind. Somewhere along the line, we forgot that this wheel is round and that we now have to start to incorporate new systems of growth and development that have the circularity, that mutually beneficial, self-enhancing, self-sustaining models. And without STEM, as we can see, we can't reinvent ourselves. It is extraordinary how we're going to have to rely on the science, on the technologies and engineering to completely reconstitute what we are as a species, to actually how we work and play and clothe and feed and house ourselves within that circularity of least of all extraction and end of use solutions. And when you look at Gitanjali, you realize that if we're going to copy, if we're going to emulate these more natural systems, then we have to do it with STEM. And what is most important is you see it through her, is that women and girls in STEM are really driven by that need to make a real positive societal impact through their work. That sense of responsibility is so intrinsically linked to the validity of their product, their service, their design, their work. And with that comes a much more multi-dimensional, richer perspective, approach, inbuilt ethical code that we're going to need if we're going to build these new systems. Also, I just wanted to say, without women's computational skills, to be frank, we are not going to be in charge of those algorithms that are going to be making decisions on our part, on our lives, not just because of our smart cities and smarter living, but because of the technocratic aspects of governance that we're going to have. So again, we need them there. And thirdly, very quickly, I just wanted to add this before we turn to our speakers, is that one of the many, many things that COVID highlighted for us was that it was this interlocking set of institutions that actually came up with the way out, at least in the short term, the way out of this pandemic. And that was the development of those vaccines. And that was because we had this extraordinary combination between the state, between the government's funding for sort of basic research, patent enforcement, safety regulations, in conjunction with the industry, with the private sector that basically has the expertise, the knowledge, and the ability to turn a raw idea into a marketable product. And that gave us the vaccines in that record-breaking time. And again, feeding into what everybody else has said, the reason I put that in its environment is because women in STEM in this environment can walk and chew gum at the same time, which is to say that they are natural bridge builders between all those different facilities, all those different agents and players that are going to need to come together. In their work, they naturally are those bridge builders, if you like, between companies and academia and government. And here I want to just do a real shout out, leaving politics and headlines aside for the moment. 3 women in the UK were absolutely instrumental in the last year, 2 of whom actually developed one of the vaccines in record-breaking time. The third one was responsible for the rollout of the distribution of those vaccines, which became equally important. And that was a shout out to Kate Bingham, who, as a biochemist working in the private sector, working as in the venture capital side of the pharmaceuticals industry, was able, when push came to shove, she was able to walk across these bridges that she had built over the career, her own career, in order to galvanize all the different players. And as she said, cross those apolitical borders in order to get everybody on board for the procurement and of those vaccines. So on that note, now let me turn to our speakers, whom I'm delighted to welcome. That is, we have Ercilia Valdo Scarpeta. She is the Chief Diversity Officer at the European Space Agency. Welcome to Maria Dahlberg, who is the Study Director at NASEM, and she has done compiled research, this really interesting report on the impact of COVID on the research careers of women in science and engineering and medicine. And a really, really warm welcome to Margaret Johnston-Clark, who is the Chief Global Diversity and Inclusion Officer at L'Oréal. So many, many thanks for joining us. I wanted, if I may, start with Maria. We have just had, as I said, this wealth of information being shot through these screens. It's exciting. There's huge potential. Briefly, what are your initial thoughts from what you've heard, some of those recommendations? How does that tie in, or does it tie in or not, with your own report on the impact of COVID on women's careers in STEM?
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you all to having us here on this panel. So in my role at the National Academies in the United States, I really focus on higher education and academic STEM careers. And so it's one of those segments that you just mentioned who really came together during the past year and developed and engaged and were able to respond so quickly to this, crisis that the world has been facing. And this idea that we had been engaging with, I think it was really interesting for people who are in my sector. We suddenly became an experimental field. Higher education policy is for the most part theoretical or very slow moving, and suddenly we were faced with these many dramatic changes. At this time last year, we released a report called Promising Practices for Supporting Women Underrepresented in STEM. And that report really did lay out a number of ways to really look at how do you implement new policies and new procedures. And I was struck when Gitanjali was speaking about her process, you know, going through this observe and brainstorm and research and build and communicate and iterating that over and over again. And the parallel with the way that the Promising Practices report put out of identifying the problem and then prototyping the problem and evaluating and communicating and iterating over again. And that sort of parallel and what we've faced over the past year and the lack of our ability to go through that intentional, iterative process in this same way that really allows us to implement programs and policies that can support women as they're developing their careers. In the same way that we know from the evidence is sort of one of the best practices to move forward. The other,
can I just ask you sorry to interrupt you, because I think we've got some flexibility in the time and we can come back and forth, and obviously if there are other speakers who want to come in, do. But what I find is really interesting is that, especially in academia, it seems like so the pandemic has been good for those women who are working on COVID, basically, but it hasn't been good for, you know, women who really need those labs. The labs are shut, the schools are shut. They haven't been able to resume their careers in the way that they need to, maybe applying for grants, maybe even job offers. And you've worked very, very closely with women in this new, very fast evolving, changing environment and online working, having that flexibility. And I know we've heard all the negatives, but I'm wondering whether women in STEM in these different sectors can actually do, I don't know if it's to do better in these new flexible working environments. Have they been able to communicate across wider sections? Have they become visible in a way that they weren't visible before? And maybe those ranks that, you know, can they come through the ranks in a different way? Maria, what about your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's interesting you're bringing it up. I was just pondering around this idea of collaboration, which was also something that came up for most of the speakers, and the impact on STEM collaborations, that this use of our new digital technologies, the new innovations that we've gathered, has actually been really beneficial to many different collaborative endeavors over the past year. Not all of them on the, you know, many that involved synchronous communications. We still had to deal with managing and balancing this sort of blurring of boundaries between personal lives and professional lives that was enforced because of the pandemic lockdowns. But the way, you know, even my participation on this panel, for example, was allowed because we are becoming more and more comfortable with our use of technology, sharing of ideas, and our ability to communicate across boundaries has been sort of more engaged because we're able now to really sort of have more flexibility. Yeah. And I think that there's some great opportunities that we've been able to explore in that space.
That's really interesting. And hopefully maybe, I don't know, I mean, in terms of job applications, in terms of putting yourself out there as a woman scientist, you know, maybe that's you know, a more open future for some of them, especially moving up through the ranks. I wanted, if I may, and do feel free to interrupt each other if you like. I don't mean interrupt, but, you know, make your interventions if so. Celia, I just wanted to turn to you. I mean, while we struggle on Earth, space has become this really very, very exciting new frontier. It's always been there, But in terms of, it used to be maybe an elite of governments that were interested in space, and now it seems like everyone is interested in space. And I really wanted to just ask you, coming from your vantage point, are these kind of space programs and planetary exploratory missions really inspiring, galvanizing girls and women to get involved in this in the sector of space science?
Thank you very much, Tricia, for the question. And yes, it's true. On one side, we have all been witnessing the activity on Mars just 1 month ago. There were a lot of life around Mars, and on one side you had NASA rover landing, but also the first Chinese interplanetary mission. But also a very special mission from the Emirates, the first mission from an Arab country, with the mission Hope. And why this mission was quite special to our eyes, to our discussion, because it had a very high representation of women in the team. And this is something that we see. We often discuss about the fact that we have actually a kind of paradox that we have to manage, is that women that comes from countries with a very high gender equality, there is the minimum of women getting into the STEM subject, and also the maximum of women actually, or girls with less confidence in themselves. Why we see the contrary, in countries where there is not the same level of gender equality, many girls see that there is really an empowerment path for them, an empowerment possibility of being independent, of contributing to the future through getting into those subjects. So it's true that the ambition of space is to talk to humanity in a way, to represent the adventure of humanity in exploring and in going beyond our own border. However, we know, for instance, we know from a European perspective that there are not yet many girls that feel ready to get into this adventure. Actually, one of the big news with respect to space of the last week is that the European Space Agency has launched, after 11 years, I would say 11, 12 years from the previous call, a new call for astronauts. This new call for astronauts will prepare the next crew. The next crew will have big challenges, fantastic challenges ahead, not just the space station, but there is the moon, there are the commercial partners. So it will be a fantastic endeavor to be part of. And this campaign is very much focused on diversity, because at the last campaign, actually, you know that the first European woman that was selected to fly in space was Claudia Nyerere. At the time of her selection, there were only 1 woman over 6 applicants. But in a way, the problem is that the same kind of proportion was also at the selection when Samantha Cristoforetti, was selected, so in 2008. And we cannot think that we have only 1 over 6 girls applying and wishing to be an astronaut. We are very much convinced that there is much more there. And this is why we wanted also to have a campaign. Actually, the position will be opened at the end of this month and will run for 2 months. So it's a call to all the girls, European girls, to go for that. But the idea is also to change the narrative, and the narrative that is much more inclusive, a narrative that, with respect to exploration, is not conquering, is not a race among nations, but is really bringing up the European values, and the European values are inclusion, the European values are knowledge, taking care of our planets, inspiring the future generation. And this is really what we want to achieve through this new selection.
And do you have, because of the timing of these exploratory missions, which usually, you know, is over years and years, do you have that timeline to be able to start to get girls involved and skilling girls to come into it? You know, it's not like a call right now for people to join. If you know that these missions are going to take time, I mean, I think the mission to Saturn, you know, was over 20-25 years. Can you bring them in knowing that there is the ultimate goal, and maybe bring them in, you know, at a sort of during the midst of that stage of that mission?
We know very well that the STEM identity in girls gets shaped during the primary school, and actually we're also working very much with some partnership trying to work towards this dream gap. The little girls, they perceive themselves as not being able to do, they don't perceive themselves as brilliant as the boys, although the results are the same. And this has an impact in then projecting themselves as astronauts, as presidents, and so on. Yeah. So every phase in the life of a girl, or that becomes a woman, or of a little girl becomes a girl and woman, requires a different kind of narrative, a different kind of means to involve them. But that's clear that if we want more women in STEM and more women astronauts, we have to start in making sure that we include girls in the mathematics. The mathematics is the language of STEM, is the language of the universe. If we accept that girls start to be convinced that mathematics is not for them, they cannot catch up when they are in high school. So the focus in including everyone, every girl in mathematics, beyond the anxiety of mathematics, but really feeling that there is a language that allows to get access to fantastic words. This is, for me, the first step to take if we want to have many more astronauts.
Do you think that
a little anecdote that I like a lot, and to be an astronaut, so to apply, you need to have a STEM degree. And during the press conference where we launched the campaign, there was a journalist, because we also launched a campaign for astronauts with disability. And this is a first for the European Space Agency to promote the possibility to have people with disability in space. And then there was a journalist that said, when will you give also the option to people with another kind of disability to go to space? And I asked, which kind of disability? And he said, to not be good in mathematics. So I think there is really something there, and something that we should tackle if we want to see a sustainable change in the future.
And of course, that ties in very much to the idea that, you know, raising awareness through teaching STEM of the social and environmental applications of STEM. You know, I think there was a great quote. I'm just going to say this before I turn to Margaret. I read this. I mean, but it's part of that same ethos that you're talking about. And this came from a CEO of Fidelity International, but she was talking about maths as such, and she said, you know, armies of people leave school knowing their trigonometry without ever using it again. Perhaps the building blocks of how mortgages, credit cards, insurance, and pensions work might be more useful. And that's just to say that we need to have a lot more relevance in kind of the subjects that we teach at school, rather than just saying, well, that's it, you've done that bit, ticket, now you leave, and you never apply it again to your life, you know. So we hear you loud and clear. That has to change. I must now come to Margaret. Welcome, Margaret. So I wanted, we know there's so many aspects to all of this, but obviously one that runs throughout everything in terms of the obstacles is bias. And this is bias at all levels of our lives. And I know that Celia was on a task force on behalf of the Italian government following the trajectory of a woman's life and her career and where those obstacles come and go. And I know that, Margaret, at L'Oréal, you've also noticed this. Last year, there was this sort of peer-reviewed report that came out showing really, really alarmingly high levels of harassment towards women in STEM jobs. I mean, this is not sexual harassment. This is demeaning and belittling treatment of women in those jobs by their managers, by their colleagues, by their customers. And it concluded that it was driving women out of these jobs, which is just inconceivable, but that's what's happening. Talk to us, Margaret, at L'Oréal, because you have been really quite revolutionary in a way. You're adapting to this new world, and you've turned ostensibly a sort of cosmetic and beauty company into what you call a beauty tech company, while at the same time having a real proactive policy of promoting women into the senior ranks. Is that a way that we can get around these obstacles of bias? How has that worked out for you guys?
So, hello everyone. Very happy to be here with you. Maybe let me give you a few insights on what I mean by beauty tech company. As you probably all know, L'Oréal is a fully cosmetic company. We own over 35 international brands worldwide. We have over 85,000 people in 150 countries. Our obsession is to create new products for men and women and people of all genders around the world. But to do so, we need to create new tech assets to further drive the digital momentum that the group has already established. But by doing that, we have to leverage technology to augment our product and our services to offer employees experiences and at the same time become tech and data powered to reinforce our expertise and augment our employees. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that most people think of just products as cream in a jar or shampoo in a jar. There's the technology to create it, but today, and obviously this has been enhanced and clearly seen in the last few months, the experience from afar or with the use of data, but also use of tech has become absolutely crucial. So we need to provide our employees with leading edge tech solutions to grow our business. So there's the whole consumer journey. But if I come back to the people within the company, we have 70% of women in our workforce, but a lot of them are beauty advisors, or we're not necessarily equally across all functions and across all companies. So there was a very concerted effort by our leadership that started 15 years ago to really promote women in leadership positions across all functions, including in R&I, including in the supply chain, and today in our IT teams. So for instance, the deputy CEO of L'Oréal is a woman engineer who is in charge of R&I, but of all the technology, of all the IT. So I guess one of the things we've done is we've chosen the best to be our leaders, but also there was a dedicated and concerted effort to make sure that those people were mentors. And if they could be women, it'd be a great thing, especially in fields like IT, where, like everyone else, we may have less women applying spontaneously than men. So this doesn't differ from any other company in that sector. What we've done to answer your question is to really focus here on the inclusive workspace. Obviously, that's been challenged with the hybrid situation that we've all known in the last 12 months. But there's the leadership and leading by example by showing women at the top level, but also focusing on certain behavior, all forms of microaggressions, including sexism, for instance. So this is something that we've tackled because it's not because there are a lot of women in our workplace that we didn't encounter this. So we decided to not only raise awareness, but upskill, but also offer all kinds of e-learning assets for people to, even from afar, be able to upskill themselves in this field. So for instance, sexism is something that's very important and that we really have decided to reach out throughout the company, including in our tech teams, because we had a lot of women coming from other industries who might have suffered from that or where it was still a taboo. So we do also have, obviously, a whistleblowing platform. We have on harassment, whether it's bullying or sexual harassment or any form of harassment. But that's more typical, even though we've done it for over 10 years. And we've actually extended it to all of our suppliers. So
And
yes, it's a concerted effort.
I remember you, when we chatted, you said that you found that there was women were leaving around the age of 42. And I was wondering whether, you see this, you discover it in your company. How do you tackle that problem that suddenly these women are leaving at around that age?
So it wasn't actually, when we were talking about this, I was referring to a study that we had shared within the Women's Forum, that about women in tech, in the field of with tech skills or in tech companies, that they tended to leave in their early 40s and therefore never necessarily reaching top level management. At L'Oréal, we don't necessarily have that issue, but we anticipated it, and hence that's why a lot of the inclusive workspace initiatives, for instance, sexism, we put into place to make sure that people felt that it was safe enough to speak up, to disclose, whether they were being a victim of something or whether they were suffering of something, whether maybe today mental health, or actually, if we come back to the COVID issue, how to manage maybe homeschooling in certain countries while working from afar and so on, where unfortunately a lot of that is still done by women.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you quickly as well. We're okay on time.
Okay.
And I wanted to get some audience questions in as well. L'Oréal participated in Macron's 2018 Tech for Good Summit. And you explained there were sort of 5 streams that people kind of went into with these. I think it was 33 companies that participated, and L'Oréal was part of the Tech for Diversity. And since we have you as diversity officers, talk to us about those interactions, that intersectionality between race and gender in the STEM sector.
So the Tech for Good Summit was launched 3 years ago by the French President Macron. It's actually over 80 global tech companies, and there are 5 work streams on different themes. L'Oréal and SAP actually co-chair the work stream on Tech for Diversity. There are other ones on education or on environmental sustainability or entrepreneurship. So we have a smaller group of probably close to 20 companies involved in this work stream. And we make commitments every year. So we make commitments as a whole, and then we try and get the other companies in the other work streams to tag along. We've been quite successful in this because it was very focused on gender, actually. In fact, it was solely focused on gender. And so we started having the conversation last year about last spring, actually, about maybe going beyond. I'd focused a lot of attention on disability and tech and accessibility, making sure that we put this into place in all of the assets that we develop as tech companies. But we were thinking about also going beyond women and going beyond, but touching upon everything related to obviously ethnicity and how we could combat racism if certain of the tools on the issue of AI and biases. So this is definitely something that we are looking into. We got a very positive response from everyone, obviously in the work stream. But then again, if they're in the work stream, they're pretty gung-ho on all of these diversity topics. What I think is great is that we've been able to, because all these CEOs come together once a year, they kind of get, there's a bit of a peer pressure about signing upon and making sure that we do reach 30% of women, for instance, by 2020. Excuse me, by 2022, and we, for instance, we added on a commitment last year to make sure that 30% of women with tech skills were in our companies, not in HR or communications within the tech company, but actually were occupying a function that needed STEM skills. So this is something where there's and the discussion to go beyond gender and to focus on intersectionality definitely has gotten a good momentum at this stage from the other partnering companies.
And it's Celia. Can I just come to it, Celia? Because I'm not sure if you can stay with us for the whole session, because you're under curfew here in, I presume you're in Italy. Just you did this very interesting, you participated in this task force on equal opportunity. Where do you see the most obstacles in terms of diversity and obviously inclusion in these industries, in the STEM sectors? Where do you see, I mean, it's very complex. It starts at the beginning and it keeps going. But where do you see there's some real problems that could be addressed reasonably efficiently?
There are, yes, we have been through the several obstacles, but let's say that, I mean, you know, there is a real revolution, the fact that women now get more graduated than men, so there are more graduated women than men. So in principle, as long as they are in control, they are able to, I mean, to make it. The moment you go on the job market, the things, you start to have the leaking pipeline. If you ask me what I learned after 3 years as Chief Diversity Officer, I can tell you that people prefer much more familiarity to diversity. There is less risk to manage, there is less problems, and so people don't go spontaneously to diversity until you have a critical mass. In particular, when you are a very successful organization, people ask you, what are you trying to fix? Mm-hmm. So there is still this element of not having a clear idea, even within organization, of the real value of diversity, what can really bring on the table. Yeah. And this is something that will come there when we will start to have really a critical mass of women in. And this is why, given that the system, they don't go naturally in a direction of including others, we have to be stronger in creating, first of all, equal opportunities to all, and making sure that all have the condition to succeed. I want to link to a comment from Anna, because you were asking what have we learned from this experience, from the fact that we are working in a different way. 20 years ago, now even maybe less, 15 years ago, we were already discussing gender equality at ESA. And actually, one of the things that I remember I was putting on the table, I was really observing that there is a kind of time divide that was also at the origin of this different treatment and careers. What does it mean? That you have often the man, the boss, that gets out the meeting at 7 o'clock. The women are back home and the men are still around, and so they talk and then so on. Now, one of the proposals I made at the time in a provocative way, so we're talking about the beginning of the 2000s, was, why don't we shut off light at 6 o'clock? Everybody has to be home, and then once the men and girls and women are all home, then it's really equal opportunity. I mean, of course, there is the family to manage, but the family is there and both are there, and they can really. So I think this is maybe the opportunity to work on this time divide. And not having this physical presence, they make a great difference when you have someone in front of your eyes all the time. You think of him and not of her, and maybe this is something. Maybe we can introduce a new way of working so that everyone has the same opportunity of being around and working from home in a fair way.
I think we will anyway, because it's going to be just much more hybrid working anyway. And so perhaps that will transition in a more organic way. I want to turn to Maria. Maria, do you any calls for action, if you will, in terms of you taking from what you discovered in that report? What do you think has to happen in the next 5 years, let's say?
Well, I'll note that our report itself did not make recommendations because we did it on a fairly tight timescale. But we did lay out a set of 31 research questions. And we set those out because we knew that this was an ongoing situation. that institutions really do need to take some time and do self-reflection. Many of the decisions that were made over the course of the last year were made quickly, understandably so. But as we talked about, often when you make a fast decision, it's less done with intentionality. And now is a time where we're starting to take a deeper breath. And now is a time when we can sit back and we can really re-examine some of those choices that were made. And we can try and put brakes on policies that maybe are going to have more harm than good, and look at enhancing the policies that might be able to help develop more equitable workplaces, engage in those policies that will help the flexibility, see whether, putting in a turning off the lights at 6 p.m. is a great way of getting everybody home and equalizing the networking opportunities. We don't know whether that will work. We don't know whether there will be benefits and outcomes that come from that. But we have to continue doing the research to understand, to evaluate what happened and what we put into place so we can keep moving forward, and so that we don't lose the gains that we have made over the past several decades, because we are at risk that all of those gains may just slip away if we don't do it with intentionality moving forward.
And maybe, should I know this sounds maybe glib, but should women and girls be taught, should they learn how to speak up in this environment? I'm saying this because we're all in this environment right now, and I'm finding in my work that women are becoming less vocal in these meetings when there are quite a lot of men involved. And I'm wondering, is that part of what we do? That's just I'm just going to throw it out there. If I turn to Margaret, a quick call to action before we close up.
I think that's a really. I'll just answer one. Well, to your question is, I do think that this new way of working doesn't encourage or doesn't give space to introverts or to people who don't necessarily want to speak up. Yeah. So I strongly believe that we need to train our managers how to be really inclusive. So I've added several modules to our training sessions that are for transitioning to leadership positions. So we have 6 levels at the top level. And I've added certain modules with different steps. And one of them is about listening. It's about empathy, but it's also about making sure that in this type of situation, no one who doesn't dare speak up for whatever reason, it could be cultural, it could be linked to their gender, it could be just their personality, isn't forgotten. So I think inclusive management, I think, is the way to go, whatever field you're in. And it's probably more true when you are in a minority, which is the case in the STEM environment. You need to stand up and you need to have a voice. So I think we need to find new ways of encouraging that, of enabling that.
Exactly, because STEM really needs human skills as well as everything else.
Yes.
Celia, any call to action on your part? Oh no, you're on mute. You're on mute. It had to happen.
The call for action is really not to fit, for girls really feeling the superpowers that Sophie was mentioning. And these superpowers are, as we said many times, to contribute to the future, to be in those places where we can imagine and make it possible the future, but also the power to be insolent, to be vocal, to say whatever, and not to be afraid of a judgment of what you are saying, and feel this freedom of the self-confidence of being who you are.
Yeah, thank you. Could I just bring in maybe Nadia and Lind on this? Any final thoughts from you? Any calls to action? I can't see you on my screen. I don't know where they've gone. Are they here?
Yeah, Hind is still there. I think Maria would like to make a final statement as well.
Please, please, Nadia.
Maria first.
Oh, Maria, go ahead.
Well, no, I just wanted to build on this idea about women speaking up and having a voice, particularly in virtual spaces, and remind people that harassment and those gender roles haven't gone away just because we're on a Teams platform or a Zoom platform. And so that needs to be kept in mind, and the sort of the inclusive monitoring is also really important in these spaces.
Yeah.
And then also, I always get a little hesitant when people say that it's on the shoulders of the individual who is in the minority to change the environment in which they've been placed. Yes, we can all try and speak up, or we can try and develop now to get those skills in place, and I think that's always great, but it shouldn't be on the onus on women alone to change our system. We're the ones who are trying to survive and thrive in that system. So I think we should also make a call into the men who are
well said, exactly,
speaking within power.
Well, and also because it's just so much more of a fun world when it's 50-50, right? I mean, this is the point. I've been at meetings that are inspirational because of those genders all, it's incredible, and when it doesn't happen, it's so boring, But anyway, I think Nadia, would you like to finish up for us and just give us one inspiring thing?
My call to action, if I am inspired by the report that's just been released, would be to firstly think about how you, if you are in a STEM role right now, can think about skilling as a way to turbocharge and get to the next level. And don't be afraid, as we saw from the hindrances, sometimes it's self-imposed as opposed to anything structural. And the second, alongside that, exactly as Maria just said, lobby for change in your organization. So, it shouldn't be just on you to be going off and figuring things out. And it is important that you share, facts that show that there's a difference between, that there's structural differences in between men and women and how they learn and how they might put themselves forward for things like STEM skills opportunities, and put those facts forward. Don't be shy about it. And then put the onus, as was just said, on the organization at large to make a difference.
Fantastic, well said. I'm going to now pass it back to Sophie. I want to say a huge heartfelt thanks. Great conversation. As you know, this could go on. It's got so many different permutations and complexities, but we're done for now. And thank you very, very much, folks, for everything. Sophie, over to you.
Thank you very much. I wonder whether, Hind, actually, I might call you for a final comment before I close.
Yeah, sure. I think my final comment would be take a chance with what's different from you, and be aware of your own bias. Give a chance to what's different, what's diverse. It might be scary, but you might end up actually making the world better.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think you've all shared some very powerful ways of rewriting our economies and societies. I will pick up, Celia, your comments, whether changing the narrative from one of conquest to the moon to raising up humanity for inclusion, or Margaret of making a very conscious and intentional commitment to inclusion, to Maria finding new opportunities to collaborate through technology and continue to inquire and research all these unanswered questions. So thank you, all of you, and thank you, Trisha, for your masterful moderation as ever. I hope many of you will go and look at this report and this fascinating and practical recommendation that came out from our collective work. And now I would really want to invite our audience, for those of you who want to join us into networking moments. You should see a link in your button appearing in the interactivity tab of the chat to join the networking where we can talk among ourselves and reflect on what we heard. I also want to invite you all back tomorrow at 5:30 Paris time. We'll be here again for our next session on AI for an inclusive future, another of our daring circle at the Women's Forum with another fascinating panel. And with all that, I just want to close. Thank you all speakers again for your great contribution, and I look forward to seeing you, as many of you as possible, in the networking space. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.